41 mechanics stood in that lot, every one of them certified, every one of them in a pressed uniform with a name badge that cost more than her rent. And then there was Renata Voss, grease under her fingernails, a 6-year-old on her hip. Her daughter, Massie, was clutching a stuffed dog named Cog, brown ears, one button eye, the way a kid holds something when she can feel that the room doesn't want her mother there. The billionaire's son was already laughing before Renata had set her toolbox down. He said, loud enough for the cameras and the crowd and the 3 regional TV vans parked along the fence, that he would write a check for $1 million to anyone in that lot who could fix the transmission on his 1967 Shelby GT500 in under 4 hours. Then he looked at Renata. He looked at Cog. He smiled the kind of smile that doesn't mean anything good. What happened in the next 3 hours and 41 minutes? Stay with this one. It earns it. His name was Preston Hale III, 29 years old. His father had made the money in aerospace. Preston had made a name for himself in car shows and charity galas and magazine features about men who collected things. The GT500 was his centerpiece, candy apple red, numbers matching engine. He had bought it at auction for $1, $4 million, and driven it exactly 11 miles before the transmission seized on the exit ramp of I-90. He had it towed to the Hale Motorsports Invitational in Phoenix, an event he had founded 3 years ago, largely to give himself somewhere to wear his driving gloves. The challenge was his idea. He announced it at 10:14 in the morning, standing on a flatbed trailer with a microphone that someone else was holding for him. 41 certified mechanics. 1 car. 4 hours. $1 million. The crowd pressed against the rope line. The cameras swung toward the GT500. Preston stepped down from the trailer and walked the lot slowly, looking at each mechanic the way a man looks at livestock he isn't impressed by. He stopped in front of Renata. She was standing at the back of the line. She had not been invited. She had driven 40 minutes from Mesa in a '99 Silverado with a cracked dashboard and a car seat in the back, after seeing the event flyer at the AutoZone where she bought her brake pads every other month. The flyer said, "Open to all certified technicians." She was certified. She had her ASE card in her wallet between a library card and a photo of her daughter at 4 years old, missing her front teeth. Preston looked at her toolbox. He looked at Macy. He looked at Cog, the stuffed dog with one button eye, and he did something with his mouth that wasn't quite a smile. He said, "This isn't a daycare." The men around her laughed, not all of them, but enough. Renata did not look up. She reached down and set Macy on a folding chair she had brought herself and handed her a juice box and said quietly, not to the crowd, not to Preston, just to Macy, "Sit here. I'll be right back." Macy pressed Cog against her chest and nodded. She was 6. She had her mother's eyes and her father's silence, and she understood more than most adults gave her credit for. Renata picked up her toolbox and walked toward the GT500. There are things you carry when you become a mother and a mechanic at the same time. Most of them are invisible. Renata had been working on engines since she was 9 years old in her uncle's shop in Albuquerque, a concrete building with a corrugated tin roof and a radio that only got one station, and the smell of gear oil that she would associate for the rest of her life with the feeling of understanding something. Her uncle, a man named Elias, had never treated her like a curiosity. He handed her a wrench at 9 and expected her to use it correctly by 10, and she did. She had a degree in mechanical engineering from Arizona State that she had finished in 3 years while working 30 hours a week at a dealership. She had a daughter she was raising alone. Macy's father had left when Macy was 14 months old. Not dramatically, not with a fight, just with a duffel bag and a message on the kitchen counter that said he wasn't built for this. Renata had read it twice, folded it in half, put it in the recycling, and made Macy's breakfast. That was 5 years ago. She paid rent on a 2-bedroom apartment in Mesa. She worked at a transmission shop called Garrett's 6 days a week. She was the only woman on the floor. She was also the only one Garrett called when something came in that no one else could figure out. He never said that out loud. He just called her. At 10:22 in the morning, she knelt beside the GT500 and put her hand against the transmission housing and closed her eyes for 3 seconds. Not performing, not stalling, feeling. Preston Hale III did not watch her. He was talking to a man from a car magazine and eating a breakfast burrito someone had handed him and laughing at something the camera operator said. He had 41 mechanics on the lot. He had budgeted the $1 million as a publicity expense. His accountant had told him that. The real purpose of the challenge was content. Footage. The kind of spectacle that pushed an algorithm and built a brand. He had not genuinely expected anyone to fix it. The GT500's transmission was a top-loader 4-speed, an original unit, rebuilt once in 1971, and then not touched for decades before a restoration shop in Scottsdale had gone through it in 2019. The restoration shop had done something wrong. Specifically, they had installed a replacement second-gear synchronizer ring that was 9/1000ths of an inch too thick, not a measurement visible to the eye. Not something you'd catch without knowing exactly where to look and exactly what tolerance the original spec required. The shop had missed it. Preston had paid them $22,000 and missed it too. Every mechanic who had looked at the car since, 3 of them, all experienced, had missed it. 37 of the 41 mechanics on the lot were currently focused on the hydraulics, the clutch linkage, the obvious things. Renata was not focused on those. Macy sat in her folding chair 12 feet away and held cog and watched her mother work. At 10:51, a man named Walt, older, heavy-set, a 40-year veteran of Ford dealerships, walked past Renata's position and looked down at what she was doing and stopped walking. He didn't say anything. He just watched for a moment. Then he nodded, once, very slowly, and walked on. Walt had known Elias. He had known Elias for 22 years. He had never met Renata before today, but he recognized the way she held a micrometer, and some things you recognize. Preston's associate, a man named Clifton Graves, had been watching the lot from behind a pair of sunglasses since 9 in the morning. Clifton was 44. He wore a watch that cost more than Renata's car. He was Preston's event coordinator, and in a function that had no official title, the person who made problems disappear before Preston had to be aware of them. At 11:15, Clifton walked to the lot judge, a retired NASCAR official named Frank DeSoto, and said something quietly. Frank's expression did not change, but when Renata asked for a specific measurement gauge from the equipment tent at 11:22, it was not available. The gauge had been signed out to another mechanic. That mechanic, when Renata found him, said he hadn't asked for it. He didn't know who had signed his name. Renata looked at the form on the clipboard for a long moment. Not anger, not surprise. Something quieter than that. She walked back to her Silverado, opened the toolbox, bolted to the truck bed, and took out her own gauge. She had bought it used from an estate sale in Tempe 4 years ago. It was older than Preston Hale III. It was accurate to 0.02 of an inch. She walked back to the GT500. Macy had fallen asleep in the folding chair with Cog tucked under her chin. The button eye faced up at the Arizona sky. At 12:07 in the afternoon, Renata found it. Not with drama. Not with an announcement. She found it the way you find something you already suspected was there, with a quiet, specific stillness that looks from the outside like nothing at all. The synchronizer ring, 9/1000ths over spec. She measured it twice. She measured it a third time. The number did not change. She stood up, walked to her toolbox, and began to work. The mechanics nearest to her, 2 men from a shop in Tucson, had stopped paying attention to her around 11 o'clock. They looked over now. One of them watched for a full 2 minutes without speaking. Then he pulled out his phone. He did not take a video for social media. He called his shop foreman. He said quietly, into the phone, "There's a woman here who just found something in a top loader that 3 other shops missed. I'm watching her fix it right now." At 1:33 in the afternoon, Renata Voss started the engine of the 1967 Shelby GT500. The transmission engaged in first gear without protest. She moved through second. Clean, precise. No grind, no hesitation. The synchronizer seated perfectly against its cone. The sound that went through that lot was not applause, not yet. It was silence first, the specific kind of silence that lands when a room full of people who doubted something have to update everything they thought they knew. Walt, the 40-year Ford veteran, put his hands in his pockets and looked at the ground and said nothing. But he was smiling. Macy woke up. She looked across the lot at the car. She looked at her mother behind the wheel. She held Cog against her chest and didn't say anything either. She was 6. She had learned to recognize what her mother's face looked like when she had done the thing she came to do. Preston Hale III had his back turned. He heard the engine. He heard the silence that followed. He turned around slowly, still holding the tail end of a conversation he had been having with the magazine writer. He looked at the GT 500. He looked at Renata in the driver's seat. He looked at the clock on the lot display board. 1 hour and 27 minutes remaining. His mouth closed. Clifton Graves was already moving. What Clifton did next was documented. That is the important part. It was documented because Frank DeSoto, the lot judge, had been keeping written notes since 10:14 in the morning, time-stamped in a carbon copy logbook that he had been using at motorsports events since 1987. He used it out of habit. He had not been asked to. He kept it because Frank DeSoto was 71 years old and had spent 4 decades watching people try to cheat at things, and he had learned that paper was the only thing that held. At 1:36, Clifton approached Frank and said that the vehicle start could not be certified because the mechanic had used a personal measurement tool rather than the official event equipment. He said this constituted a disqualification under the event rules. Frank opened his logbook to the page from 10:14 and showed Clifton the rules as he had recorded them when Preston read them aloud from the trailer. There was no specification about equipment source. There was no rule that required mechanics to use only event-provided tools. Frank had written every word Preston said, word for word. Clifton looked at the page. Frank said, "She fixed the car. In the time. I watched her do it." Clifton said something about consulting legal. Frank said, "Go ahead, I'll be right here." Preston came to the car at 1:44. He walked around it slowly. He crouched and looked at the transmission from below with a flashlight, the way a man does when he is hoping to find something wrong and coming up empty. He stood up. He looked at Renata, who was standing 8 feet away with her arms at her sides. He said, "Prove it works." She got in the car. She drove it in a controlled loop around the marked section of the lot, first, second, third, fourth, and came back to the same spot and stopped the engine and got out and stood where she had been standing. Preston was quiet for 11 seconds. People counted later in the footage. Then he said, "I need to verify the work with my own team before I release any funds." Renata said nothing. Walt said from across the lot without raising his voice, "Preston, I've been building Fords since before you were born. That transmission is fixed. Any man here who knows what he's looking at knows it." He paused. "And the ones who don't, they can ask her." A few people laughed, not unkindly. Preston looked at Walt for a long time. Then he looked at Renata. Then he looked at Macy, who had walked across the lot and was now standing beside her mother, holding Cog by one ear, looking up at Preston Hale III with the specific, uncomplicated attention that 6-year-olds give to things they are trying to figure out. Clifton had made 3 phone calls in the last 12 minutes. The first was to Preston's lawyer. The second was to the event's insurance contact. The third, and this was the one that mattered, was to a digital media coordinator on Preston's staff to discuss whether the footage from the lot could be edited before it went to the 3 TV vans outside. What Clifton had not accounted for was that Frank DeSoto had been standing 6 feet away during all 3 calls. Frank was old and quiet and had spent his career being underestimated by men in expensive watches, and he had written down the substance of all 3 conversations in his logbook. He had also, at 1:19, before the engine started, before any of this became complicated, walked to the rope line and handed a copy of the event rules, as Preston had stated them, to a producer from one of the TV vans. Because Frank DeSoto had been doing this for 40 years, and he had learned that the copy you give away is the one that survives. At 2:11, Preston Hale III wrote the check. He did not do it graciously. He did it the way a man does something when he has run out of moves and knows it, quickly, without looking up, as if speed might reduce the visibility of the moment. He tore it from the book and held it out. Renata took it. She looked at it once. She folded it and put it in the front pocket of her work pants, next to her ASE card and the library card and the photo of Macy missing her front teeth. She did not say thank you. She did not say anything. She picked up her toolbox. Clifton, behind Preston, said loudly, to no one in particular but to everyone within range, that the check was a gesture of goodwill and not an admission that the challenge conditions had been met, and that Preston Hale III reserved all rights. Walt said, still from across the lot, "Clifton, everyone here has a phone. Stop talking." The TV producer from Van 2, a woman named Yara, was already at the rope line with her crew. She called Renata's name. Renata looked at her. Yara said, "Can we talk to you for a few minutes?" Renata looked at Macy. Macy looked up at her, then at Yara, then back at her mother. She said, "We can talk, but we have to be home before dinner." 3 days later, Clifton Graves was no longer employed by Hale Motorsports. The logbook entries Frank DeSoto had made, combined with the footage from all 3 TV vans, which captured Clifton's conversations at the rope line clearly enough that 2 network attorneys had reviewed them by Thursday morning, made his position untenable. The attempt to edit the footage had been documented. The call to the media coordinator had been documented. The conversation with Frank about the disqualification criteria had been documented. Paper. It always came down to paper. Preston Hale III released a statement. It was specific. It named what had happened. It said he had been wrong about the challenge conditions and wrong to allow interference with the judging process, and wrong at 10:14 in the morning when he had looked at a woman with a toolbox and a daughter and a stuffed dog and said what he said. The statement did not say, "I'm sorry if anyone felt." It said, "I was wrong." His PR team had written 11 drafts. He had approved the 12th, which was the one his lawyer told him was the only version that would hold. The Shelby GT500 ran flawlessly. Renata deposited the check on a Wednesday. She took Macy to school first, then drove to the bank, then to Garrett's for the 6 o'clock shift. Garrett met her at the door. He had seen the footage. Everyone had seen the footage by Tuesday, and he said nothing about it because Garrett was a man of 40 years in the trade and he expressed respect through scheduling, not speech. He had moved her to lead diagnostician. The title came with a raise that was not enough but was something. She took it. Walt had called her the day before. She had not given him her number, but he had found it through Elias, who was still alive and still running the shop in Albuquerque with 2 employees and the same one-station radio. Elias had said when she told him about the lot that he had expected this would happen eventually. Not this exactly, but something like it. He said it the way he said most things, without drama, with the tone of a man who had been waiting for an outcome that had always been inevitable. He said he was proud of her. She told him it was a top loader with a synchronizer problem. He said he had seen it once in 1,979, and it had taken him 4 hours without anyone laughing at him while he worked, so she had him beat. She laughed. She had not laughed easily in a long time. That evening, she made dinner. Pasta, because it was fast, and Macy would eat it without negotiation. She set the table with the plates that had the chip on the rim. She had been meaning to replace them for a year. And Macy climbed into her chair and set Cog on the table beside her plate, button eye up the way she always did. Macy picked up her fork. She looked at her mother. She said, "Were you scared today?" Renata looked at her. She thought about the lot. The silence before the engine turned over. Preston's face. The check. Yara's camera. The way Walt had nodded at her from across the lot without saying a word, which had meant more than most things said aloud. "Today was 3 days ago," Renata said. Macy considered this. "Were you scared that day?" Renata set down her fork. She looked at her daughter for a moment, at the 6-year-old who carried a stuffed dog named Cog everywhere and had sat in a folding chair in a lot full of men who didn't think her mother belonged there and had not cried and had not complained and had fallen asleep holding that dog against her chest while her mother worked. "No," Renata said. Macy nodded. She looked down at her plate. Then she looked up again with the directness that 6-year-olds use when they are saying the thing they have been thinking about for a while. She said, "Because you already knew." Renata looked at her for a long moment. Not pride, not relief. Something quieter than that. Something older. She picked up her fork. She pushed the pasta around once. Outside, the evening was cooling. Through the window, the parking lot of the apartment complex was filling up with people coming home from work. Slow-moving, ordinary, the unremarkable traffic of an ordinary Wednesday in Mesa, Arizona. Macy put Cog in her lap and started eating. The plates still had the chip on the rim. Neither of them mentioned it.